Chapter 1 Reproduction in Organisms. Each and every organisms can live only for a certain period of time. The period from birth to the natural death of an organism represent its lifespan. Lifespan of a few organisms are given in figure 1.1. Several other organisms are drawn for which you should find out their lifespans and write in the space provided. Examine the lifespans of organisms represented in the figure 1.1. It's not it both interesting and intriguing to note that it may be as short as few days or as long as few thousand years. Between these two extremes are the lifespans of most other living organisms. You may note that lifespan of organisms are not necessarily correlated with their sizes. The sizes of crow and parrot are not very different, yet their lifespans show a wide difference. Similarly, a mango tree has a much shorter lifespan as compared to a peepal tree. Whatever be the lifespan, death of every individual organisms is certainty. That is, no individual is immortal except single cell organisms. Why do we say there is no natural death in single cell organisms? Give this reality, have you ever wondered how vast number of plant and animal species have existed on the earth for several thousands of years? There must be some processes in living organisms that ensure this continuity. Yes, we are talking about reproduction, something that we take for granted. Reproduction is defined as biological process in which an organism gives rise to young ones, offsprings, similar to itself. The offspring grow, mature, and in turns produce new offsprings. Thus, there is a cycle of birth, growth, and death. Reproduction enables to continuity of the species generation after generation. You will study later in chapter 5. Principles of inheritance and variations. How genetic variations is created and inherited during reproduction. There is a large diversity in the biological world and each organism has evolved its own mechanisms to multiply and produce offsprings. The organism's habitat, its internal physiology, and several other factors are collectively responsible for how it's reproduced. Based on whether there is a participation of one organism or two in the process of reproduction. It is of two types. When offspring is produced by a single parent with or without the involvement of gamete formation, the reproduction is asexual. When two parents opposite sex participate in the reproductive process and also involve fusion of male and female gamete, it is called sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction. In this method, a single individual parent is capable of producing offsprings. As a result, the offsprings that are produced are not only identical to one another but are also exact copies to their parents. Are these offsprings likely to be genetically identical or different? The term clone is used to describe such morphologically and genetically similar individuals. Let us see how widespread asexual reproduction is. Among different group of organisms, asexual reproduction is common among single-celled organisms and in plant and animals with relatively simple organization. In protists and monarians, the organisms or the parent cells divided into two to give rise to new individuals. Thus, in these organisms, cell division is itself a mode of reproduction. Many single-celled organisms reproduce by binary fission, where a cell divides into two halves and each rapidly grow into an adult. Example: amoeba, paramecium. In yeast, the division is unequal and small. Buds are produced that remain attached initially to the parent cells, which eventually get separated and mature into new yeast organism cells. Under unfavorable condition, amoeba withdraws its pseudopodia and secrete a three-layered hard covering or cyst around itself. This phenomena is termed as incestation. When favorable condition returns, the encysted amoeba divides by multiple fission and produces many minute amoeba or pseudopodiospores. The cyst wall bursts out and the spores are liberated in the surrounding medium to grow up into many amoeba. This phenomena is known as sporulation. Members of the kingdom fungi and simple plants such as alga reproduce through special asexual reproductive structure. Figure 1.3. The most common of these structures are zoospores that usually are microscopic motile structure. Other common asexual reproductive structures are conidia, example paramecium, birds, example hydra, and gammules, example sponges. You have learned about vegetative reproduction in plant in class 11th. What do you think? Is vegetative reproduction also a type of asexual reproduction? Why do you say so? Is the term clone applicable to the offsprings formed by vegetative reproduction? While in animals and other simple organisms, the term asexual is used unambiguously, in plants, the term vegetative reproduction is frequently used. In plants, the unit of vegetative reproduction, such as runner, rhizome, sucker, tuber, offset, bulb, are all capable of giving rise to new offspring. Figure 1.4. These structures are called vegetative propagules. Obviously, since the formation of these structures does not involve two parents, the process involved in asexual in some organisms. If the body breaks into distinct pieces, fragments, each fragment grow into an adult capable of producing offspring. Example: hydra. This is also a mode of asexual reproduction called fragmentation. You must have heard about the scourge of the water bodies or about the terror of Bengal. This is nothing but the aquatic plant water hyacinth, which is one of the most invasive weeds found growing where there is standing water. It's drain oxygen from the waters, which leads to death of fishes. You will learn more about in this chapter 13 and 14. You will find it interestingly to know that this plant was introduced in India because of its beautiful flowers and shape of leaves. Since it can propagate vegetatively at a phenomena rate and spread all over the water bodies in a short period of time, it is very difficult to get rid of them. Are you aware how plants like potato, sugarcane, banana, ginger, dahlia are cultivated? Have you seen small plants emerging from the buds called eye of potato tuber, from the rhizomes of banana and gingers? When you carefully try to determine the site of origin of the new plantlets in the plant listed above, you will notice that they invariably arise from the nodes present in the modified stem of these plants. When the nodes comes in contact with damp soil or water, they produce roots and new plants. Similarly, adventitious buds arise from the notches present at the margin of the leaves of bryophyllum. This ability is fully exploited by gardeners and farmers for commercial propagation of such plants. It is interestingly to note that asexual reproduction is the common methods of reproduction in organisms that have relatively simple organization like algae and fungi, and they have shifted to a sexual method of reproduction just before the one set of adverse conditions. Find out how sexual reproductions enable these organisms to survive during unfavorable conditions. Why is sexual reproduction favored under such conditions? Asexual vegetative as well as sexual mode of reproductions are exhibited by the higher plants. On the other hand, only sexual mode of reproduction is present in most of the animals. Sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction involves formation of the male and female gametes either by the same individual or by the different individuals of the opposite sex. These gametes fuse to form the zygote, which develops to form the new organisms. It is an elaborate, complex, and slow process as compared to the sexual reproduction. Because of the fusion of male and female gametes, sexual reproduction results in offsprings that are not identical to the parents or amongst themselves. A study of diverse organisms, plant, animals, or fungi show that through they differ so greatly in external morphological, internal structure, and physiology, when it comes to sexual mode of reproduction, surprisingly, they share a similar pattern. Let us first discuss what features are common to these diverse organisms. All organisms have to reach a certain stage of growth and maturity in their life before they can reproduce sexually. That period of growth is called juvenile phase. It is known as vegetative phase in plants. This phase is of variable duration in different organisms. The end of juvenile vegetative phase, which makes the beginning of the reproductive phase, can be seen easily in the higher plants when they comes to flower. How long does it take to marigold, rice, wheat, coconut, mango plant to come to flower? In some plants where flowering occurs more than once, what would you call interflowering period, juvenile or mature? Observe a few trees in your area. Do they flower during the same month year after year? Why do you think the availability of fruiting like mango, apple, jackfruit, etc. is seasonal? Are these some plants that flowers throughout the year and some others that show seasonal flowering? Plants the annual and biennial type show clear-cut vegetative, reproductive and sensation phase, but in the perennial species it is very difficult to clearly difference in these phases. A few plants exhibit usually flowering phenomena, such some of them, such as bamboo species, flowers only once in their lifetime, generally after 50 to 100 years, produce large number of fruits and die. Another plant, Strobilanthes kunthiana Neelakuranji, flowers once in 12 years. As many of you know, this plant flowers during September to October 2006. Its mass flowering transformed large tract of hilly area in Kerala, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu into blue stretches and attached a large number of tourists. In animals, the juvenile phase is formed by morphological and physiological changes prior to active reproductive behavior. The reproductive phase is also of variable duration in different organisms. Can you list the changes seen in human beings that are indicative and of reproductive maturity? Among animal, for example, bird, Do they lay egg all through the year, or it's a seasonal phenomena? What about the other animal like frog and lizards? You will notice that birds living in nature laying eggs only seasonally. However, birds in captivity, as in poultry farms, can be made to lay eggs throughout the year. In this case, laying egg is not related to reproduction, but it is commercially exploitation of human welfare. The female of placental mammals exhibit cyclical changes in their activity of ovarian and accessory duct as well as hormones during the reproductive phase. In some primate mammals like cow, sheep, rat, deers, dog, tigers, etc., such cyclic changes during reproduction are called oyster cycles, where, as in primate, monkey, apes, and humans, it is called menstrual cycle. Many mammals, especially those living in natural wild condition, exhibit such cyclic only during favorable season in their reproductive phases and are therefore called seasonal breeders. Many other mammals are reproductively active throughout their reproductive phase and hence called continuous breeders. That we all grow old if we live long enough in something that we recognize, but what it's mean by growing old. The end of reproductive phase can be considered as one of the parameter of senescence or older age. These are concomitant change in the body like slowing of the metabolic activities, etc. During this last phase of lifespan, old age ultimately leads to death. In both plants and animal, hormones are responsible for the transition between the three phases. Interaction between hormones and certain environmental factors regulate the reproductive process and the associated behavioral expression of organisms. Events in sexual reproduction after attaining of maturity, all sexual reproduction organisms exhibit events and processes that have remarkable fundamental similarities, even though the structure associated with sexual reproduction are indeed very difficult. The events of sexual reproduction through elaborate and complex follow a regular sequence. Sexual reproduction is characterized by the fusion or fertilization of the male and the female gamete, the formation of zygote and embryogenesis. For convenience, the sequential events may be grouped into three distinct stages, namely the pre-fertilization, fertilization, and the post-fertilization events. Pre-fertilization events. These included all the events of sexual reproduction prior to the fusion of the gametes. The two main pre-fertilization events are gametogenesis and gamete transfer. Gametogenesis. As you are already aware, gametogenesis refers to the process of formation of the two type of gamete, male and female. Gamete are haploid cells. In some alga, the two gametes are so similar in appearance that it is not possible to categorize them into male and female gamete. They are hence called homogametes, isogamete, figure 1.5a. However, in majority of sexually reproduction organisms, the gamete produced are of two morphologically distinct type, heterogametes. In such organisms, the male gamete is called the anthrozoids or sperm, and the female gamete is called the egg and ovum. Sexually in organisms, sexual reproduction in organisms generally involve the fusion of gametes from two different individuals, but this is not also true. For your recollection of examples studied in class 11th, you identify case where self fertilization is observed for course Cheating such example in plant is easy. Plants may have both male and female reproductive structures in the same plant bisexual figure 1.6c and E, or on different plant unisexual figure 1.6d. In several fungi and plants, terms such as homothallic and monoecious are usually to denote the bisexual condition, and heterothallic and dioecious are the term used to describe unisexual condition. In flowering plant, the unisexual male flower is staminate, that is bearing stamens, while the female is pistiate or bearing pistils. In some flowering plants, both male and female flowers may be present on same individual monoecious or on separate individual dioecious. Some example of monoecious plants are cucurbits and coconuts, and the dioecious plant are papaya and date palm. Name the type of gamete that are formed in staminate and pistiate flowers. But what about animals? Are individuals of all species either male and female unisexual, or these species which possess both reproductive organisms bisexual? You probably can make a list of several unisexual animal species. Earthworm, figure 1.6a, sponges, tapeworm and leech. Typical example of bisexual animals that possess both male and female reproductive organisms are hermaphrodites. Cockroach, figure 1.6b, is an example of unisexual species. Cell division during gamete formation. Gamete is all heterogametic species are of two types, namely male and female. Gametes are haploids through the parent plant body. Forms which they arise may be either haploid or diploid. A haploid parent produces gamete by mitotic division. Does it mean that meiosis never occur in organisms that are haploid? Carefully examine the flow chart of life cycle of alga that you have studied in class 11 chapter 3 to get a suitable answer. Several organisms belong to Monera, fungi, algae and bryophytes are haploid plant body, but in organism belonging to pteridophytes, gymnosperm, angiosperms and most of the animals including human beings, the parental body is diploid. It is obvious that meiosis to reduction division has to occur if a diploid body has to produce haploid gametes. In diploid organisms, specialized cells called meiocytes, gamete mother cells, undergo meiosis. At the end of meiosis, only one set of chromosomes get incorporated into each gamete. Carefully study table 1.1 and fill in the diploid and haploid chromosome number of organisms. Is there any relationship in the number of chromosomes of meiocytes and gametes? Gamete transfer. After their formation, male and female gamete must be physically brought together to facilitate fusion fertilization. Have you ever wondered how the gamete meets? In majority of organisms, male gamete is motile and the female gamete is stationary. Exception are a few fungi and algae in which both type of gamete are motile. Figure 1.7a. There is a needed for a medium through which a male gamete move. In several simple plants like alga, bryophyte, pteridophyte, water is the medium through which these gamete transfer take place. A large number of male gamete, however, fail to reach to female gamete. To compensate this loss of male gamete during transport, the number of male gamete produced is several thousand times the number of the female gamete produced. In seed plants, pollen grain are the carrier of male gamete and ovule have the eggs. Pollen grain produced in anther therefore have to be transferred to the stigma before it can lead to fertilization. Figure 1.7b. In bisexual self-fertilization plant example P, transfer of pollen grain to the stigma is relatively easy as anther and stigma are located close to each other. Pollen grains soon after their be seeded come in contact with the stigma, but in cross-pollination plants, including dioecious plants, a specialized event called pollination facilitates transfer of pollen grain to the stigma. Pollen grains germinates on the stigma and the pollen tube carrying the male gamete reached the ovule and discharges male gamete near the egg. In dioecious animals, since male and female gamete are formed in different individuals, the organisms must evolve a special mechanisms of gamete transfer successfully transfer and come together to gamete is essential for the most critical event in sexual reproduction, the fertilization. The most vital event of sexual reproduction is perhaps the fusion of gametes. This process called syngamy results in the formation of diploid zygote. The term fertilization is also often used for this process. The terms syngamy and fertilization are frequently used through interchangeably. What would happen if syngamy does not occur? However, it has to mentioned here that in some organisms like rotifers, honeybee, and even some lizards and birds, turkey, the female gamete undergo development to form new organisms without fertilization. This phenomena is called parthenogenesis. Where does syngamy occur? In most aquatic organisms such as majority of algae and fishes as well as amphibians, syngamy occurs in external medium, water, that is outside the body of organisms. This type of gamete fusion is called external fertilization. Organisms exhibiting external fertilization show great synchrony between the sex and released a large number of gametes into the surrounding mediums water in order to enhance the chances of syngamy. This happen in the bony fishes and frog where a large number of offsprings are produced. A major disadvantage is that the offsprings are extremely vulnerable to predators, threatening their survival up to adulthood. In many terrestrial organisms belonging to fungi, higher animals such as reptiles, birds, mammals, and in a majority of plants, bryophyte, pteridophytes, gymnosperm, and angiosperm, syngamy occurs inside the body of organisms, hence the process is called internal fertilization. In all these organisms, egg is formed inside the female body where they fused within the male gamete in organisms exhibiting internal fertilization. In the male gamete is motile and has to reach the egg in order to fuse with it. In these events, through the number of sperm produced is very large, there is a significant reduction in number of eggs produced. In seeded plants, however, the non-motile male gamete are carried to female gamete by pollen tubes. Post-fertilization events in sexual reproduction after the formation of zygote are called post-fertilization events. The zygote formation of the diploid zygote is universal in all sexually reproduction organisms. In organisms with external fertilization, zygote is formed the external medium, usually water, whereas in those exhibiting internal fertilization, zygote is formed inside the body of organisms. Further development of zygote depend on the type of life cycle of the organism has an environment it is exposed to. In organisms belonging to fungi and algae, zygote develops a thick walled that is resistant to desiccation and damage. It undergoes a period of rest before germination. In organisms with haploid life cycle, as you have read in class 11th, zygote divides by meiosis to form haploid spores that grow into haploid individuals. Consult your class 11th book and find out what kind of development take place in zygote in organisms with the diplontic and haplodiplontic life cycles. Zygote is a vital link that ensure continuity of species between organisms of one generation and the next. Every sexual reproduction organisms includes human beings begins life as a single cell, the zygote. Embryogenesis. Embryogenesis refers to the process of development of embryo from the zygote. During embryogenesis, zygotes undergo cell division, mitosis, and cell differentiation. While cell division increases the number of cells in the developing embryo, cell differentiation helps groups of cells to undergo certain modification to form specialized tissue and organs to form organisms. You have studied about the process of cell division and differentiation in the previous class. Animals are categorized into oviparous and viviparous based on whether the development of the zygote take place outside the body of the female parents or inside, that is whether they lay fertilized, unfertilized egg or give birth to young ones. In oviparous animals like reptiles and birds, the fertilized egg covers by a hard calcareous shell are laid in the safe place in the environment. After a period of incubation, young ones hatched out. On the other hand, in viviparous animals, majority of mammals including human beings, the zygote develops into a young ones inside the body of female organisms. After attaining a certain stage of growth, the young ones are delivered out of the body of the female organisms. Because of proper embryonic care and protection, the chances of survival of young ones is greater in viviparous organisms. In flowering plants, the zygote is formed inside the ovule. After fertilization, the sepals, petals, and stamens of the flowers where are fall off. Can you name a plant in which sepals remain attached? The pistil, however, remain attached to the plant. The zygote develops into the embryo and ovules develop into the seeds. The ovary develops into the fruit, which develops a thick wall called pericarp that is protective in function. After dispersal, seeds germinate under favorable conditions to produce new plants. Figure 1.1. A few kind of fruit showing seeds as an protective pericarp P. Thank you.